So we can share the screen. Just a second, I apologize. Okay, here we go. I think this is better. Um, okay, so just about ready to start. We start with the Pasha in a nutshell, just to even give a introduction to the introduction to get us where we need to be. Where are we in the narrative? Where are we in the story? So the last couple of weeks, we read the stories about Abraham, and then with two portions about Abraham. Then we had a portion about Abraham sending his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Isaac. So we had a whole story of how Rivka joined the family. And then last week we talked about the marriage and the children of Isaac and Rebecca. And there were a very dramatic story last week. It was the birth of the twins, Yaakov and Esav. And you had the tension in the family where the father loves Esav and the mother loves Yaakov. And the father wants to bless the older son, and the mother wants the father to bless the younger son. So I'm not sure you should try this at home, but this is exactly what they did. The mother convinces the younger son to trick the father, present himself as he's the older son, and Yaakov steals the blessings from his brother Esav, his older brother, which is a very a dramatic story. It's also difficult to understand. What was it right? Was it wrong? We'll see. We'll see if we want to go backward. Only if we want to. But right now we're in the story. So right after that happens, the mother understands that the older brother Esav is going to want to kill and take revenge from the younger brother. So it's interesting. Esav had a profound respect for his father. So the Torah says that Esav said, "I'll wait for my father to pass away, and then I will kill my brother." So that's something beautiful about him, that even he may have wanted to kill his brother, but he didn't want to cause pain to his father. In any case, so she understands that the younger brother Yaakov has to run away. So she goes to her husband for the first time and talks to him, but she doesn't tell him. She doesn't tell him he has to run away because his older brother wants to kill him. Instead, what she says is, I don't want him to marry a woman from the local girls, Canaan. And just like she came from Haran, which is Abraham's birthplace, he says, I want my son to go back to my family and marry a woman from my culture. And so now there's so the father says, wonderful idea. And he gives the son a blessing to go back to Haran, which is Rebecca's birthplace, also Abraham's birthplace. But there's basically two reasons why they're going, and she's not being completely transparent, right? She is saying only one of the reasons for marriage, but her primary reason was to protect Jacob from his brother's wrath. So I don't know if this was too complicating with all the details. So if any questions on the narrative, let me know. But in any case, this week's parsha begins where Jacob leaves Be'er Sheva, which is a city in the south of Israel, and he's listening to his parents, and he's fleeing east, a little bit northeast, fleeing to what is today Turkey, a border of Turkey and Iraq, and he's going to Haran, firstly to escape his brother's wrath, but also to find a wife. This week's parsha covers a span of 20 years. At the end, when Jacob leaves to Israel, he's fleeing, so he has nothing. There's a whole medrash why he has literally nothing. Today, you run away, you just take your credit card. Then, in the olden days, if you wanted to run away and you wanted wealth, you had to do what Eliezer did when he went to find a wife. You had to carry 10 camels packed with gold and silver and precious things. But if you're running away, you can't go with a caravan of 10 camels because you're going to be spotted. So he basically runs away empty-handed. And the parsha ends 20 years later. It's actually one long parsha with no paragraph breaks. It's very interesting. In the Torah, there are paragraph breaks every now and then. This entire parsha, the 20-year span, there are no paragraph breaks. And what you have is the 20 years from when Isaac leaves his father's home until he comes back. Over those 20 years, a lot happens. He tried to find a wife, but instead of one wife, he ends up marrying 4 wives. And he ends up having 11 sons and a girl, plus accumulating a tremendous amount of wealth. All that happens in this week's parsha. If you want to know how it happens, we have to read the parsha in a nutshell, and then we'll talk about that's the big story, and then we can start getting into the details on what the relevance is and what the significance is, even to those who are not running away and are not marrying 4 wives. But of course, every part of the Torah is eternal and has spiritual messages as well. So here we go. So here we have it on Vayetze in a nutshell. Vayetze literally means, and he went out. Latzit, tse is go out. So the parsha begins, the name of the parsha, Vayetze, means, and he left, and is found in Genesis chapter 28. So Jacob leaves his hometown of Be'er Sheba and journeys to Haran. On the way, he encounters the place and sleeps there. Doesn't say which place. This Vayivka b'makom. He encountered a place and went to sleep, dreaming of a ladder connecting heaven and earth, with angels climbing and descending on it. God appears in the dream and promises that the land upon which he lies will be given to his descendants. So in other words, he's going outside of Israel. On the way out, he falls asleep, goes to sleep. He has a dream of a ladder, and in this ladder, God, and on top of this ladder, God is telling him that he will get the land of Israel, even though he's leaving, but eventually he'll get that land, him and his descendants. Okay, what happens in the morning? In the morning, Jacob raises the stone on which he laid his head as an altar and monument, pledging that it will be made the house of God. Okay, in Haran, Jacob stays and works for his uncle Laban, tending Laban's sheep. Laban agrees to give him his younger daughter Rachel, whom Jacob loves, in marriage in return for 7 years' labor. So everything is fine. He falls in love with Rachel. It's love at first sight. They see each other at the well, and then he wants to marry Rachel. Father says, no problem, work for 7 years, you can marry Rachel. But on the wedding night, Laban gives him his elder daughter Leah instead, a deception Jacob discovers only in the morning. Jacob marries Rachel too a week later after agreeing to work another 7 years for Laban. So now he has 2 wives, and one of them he loves more than the other, which is not always a great situation. Leah gives birth to 6 sons, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Judah, Yisachar, and Zebulun, and a daughter Dinah, while Rachel remains barren. It's not exactly accurate. First she has 4. Okay, it's not exactly accurate. In any case, Rachel gives Jacob her handmaid Bilhah as a wife to bear children in her stead, and 2 more sons, Dan and Naphtali, are born. Leah does the same with her handmaid Zilpah, who gives birth to Gad and Asher. Finally, Rachel's prayers are answered, and she gives birth to Joseph. So by now, they have 11 sons. Jacob has 11 sons and 1 daughter. Jacob has now been in Haran for 14 years and wishes to return home, but Laban persuades him to remain, now offering him sheep in return for his labor. Jacob prospers despite Laban's repeated attempts to swindle him. After 6 years, Jacob leaves Haran in stealth, fearing that Laban would prevent him from leaving with his family and property for which he labored. Laban pursues Jacob, but is warned by God in a dream not to harm him. Laban and Jacob make a pact on Mount Gal-Ed. Literally, Gal-Ed means this mount is a witness. Gal is mount. Ed is witness, attested to by a pile of stones. And Jacob proceeds to the Holy Land, where he is met by angels. So again, 1 week, we cover the span of 20 years, and a lot going on in these 20 years. Marriage, multiple marriages, children, wealth. And now, next week's parsha, there's a very poetic statement. When Jacob prays to God, when he comes back to Israel, it's a beautifully poetic statement where Jacob says, Ki b'makli avarti et hayarden hazeh. I crossed the Jordan on the way out of Israel with a stick, with a walking stick. All he had was a walking stick. Now he says, now I am 2 camps, because he divides his camps into 2. Whatever the case is, it's a very poetic visual. The person leaves with a walking stick and comes back 20 years later, and he's got camps of children, of cattle, of wealth, and so it's a prosperous time, not challenge free, of course, but prosperous in many ways. So that is the nutshell. Now we have to figure out where we want to go and what we want to talk about and what parts of the story are the strangest, which is with the parts we should gravitate to, and of course, what's the relevance to us, because that's in a way the most important. Okay, let's start with a point or two of a big picture point. Again, I say start. I'm just starting from. Jump in. Everyone's welcome to jump in whenever you like. Let's talk about the big picture. We have 3 patriarchs. Why do we have 3 patriarchs? In other words, theoretically, you could have said we have 4 patriarchs, Abraham's father, or you can classify only Abraham as the patriarch. When you say there are 3 patriarchs, what you're really telling us is that these 3 people, their stories are relevant to the collective Jewish people. And that's why you have to have 3 patriarchs. Now, how are they relevant? So usually there's different ways to look at it. There's a Kabbalistic way, and there's a more of a practical way. I'm going to mention both. I really want to talk about the practical way in a way. I want to talk about the practical way for today. But I just want to make mention of the Kabbalistic and spiritual perspective, because why not? So according to the Kabbalah, there's 2 primary emotions, or 3 primary emotions, 3 that are really 2. Your person has chesed, which is love and kindness, which is basically expression, self-expression. In the column of self-expression, you have love, kindness, giving, sharing, talking, whatever that is. That's expression. The other primary emotion would be the opposite. It would be not love, which is being drawn to something, but running away from something. In other words, returning to self. That would be fear. That would be awe. That would be respect. But what do they have in common? That I'm not about expressing myself, but I'm stepping back and honoring you. Or if something that I fear, there's something greater than self that makes me feel small. Okay, so it's either I'm drawn to something or I'm repelled from something. These are basically the two primary emotions. And according to the Kabbalah, Abraham is self-expression, Isaac is discipline, holding back, and Jacob is a blend of both of them. And the blend is compassion or empathy. We could talk about how that works out in Jacob's life. We could talk about that, but I'm just putting it out here just to show that Kabbalistically, every person has the character traits of the 3 patriarchs. But now let's think about it a little bit more historically or practically, and say, what does each of the 3 patriarchs contribute to the story? In other words, if you were missing one of these patriarchs, we would be missing a very important theme we wouldn't be able to become the Jewish people that we are today. Even just the basic story, the basic narrative. Everybody adds something critical. So what is added that's critical? So Abraham, of course, is the one who discovers God. So he starts the movement. He's the revolution, okay? So he's the person who's creating this movement. Without the beginning, without a creator, nothing happens, of course. So if you want to start a company, you need an idea. Without an idea, nothing could be done, right? So that's Abraham. So the idea that we have monotheism, we serve one God, that we understand that God transcends what we could see, and therefore we're not going to serve the forces of nature, which are many and are contradictory, but we understand there's an abstract God, abstract in the sense that we can't see him with the senses, or we can't define him with the senses, and we understand that there's a unity that transcends all the division that we see. That's Abraham's big idea. Okay, you have to have an Abraham. There's no Jewish people without Abraham. Then you have Isaac, and we talked about Isaac a little bit last week, and Isaac probably gets the least credit for what his contribution to the Jewish people, and that is that it's very easy to have a revolution. It's very easy to come up with a new idea, but to implement it over time and to have commitment, that's very hard. I don't know the numbers, but Google it after the class. How many people start a business? How many businesses start every year in the United States of America? I don't know. How many of them succeed? How many of them persevere? A very small percentage. I don't know if it's 5%, 10%. I have no idea, right? So in other words, it's relatively easy to come up with a new idea, but to find that the future generations should persist and be committed, even when the excitement and the allure of starting a new movement would fade, would sort of drift away. That requires commitment. That's Isaac. That's what Isaac teaches how to do. Who is Isaac? He has none of his own ideas. So what does he do? He's perpetuating his father's legacy. Most people don't want to do that. Most people want to come up with a name for themselves. They want to come up with their own idea. They don't want to go in the path that their parents walked in. Right? We talked about Isaac. Isaac was about digging wells. The Torah says Isaac redug all the wells that his father dug and the Philistines stuffed with water. So what do you do for a living? I redo what my father did. Nobody wants to say that, right? Because we want self-expression. I want to have my own idea. I want to leave my imprint. Okay. But if every generation creates a new idea, there's never going to be, you can't have a continuous growth. So Isaac tells us how to be committed to what came before us. Without that, there's no Judaism. Abraham had a nice idea, but if nobody would perpetuate that idea, we would definitely not be sitting here today in 2020. I think we're still in 2024, we would not be sitting doing what we're doing here right now, I guarantee you, without Isaac, without the notion of commitment to what came before us. Okay, fine. Now we know we need an Abraham, we need an Isaac. What does Jacob contribute in the practical sense? In the practical sense, Jacob's big contribution is this week's Parsha. In other words, the ability to survive and flourish outside of Israel. Right? Abraham, when he went in the beginning of his story, God says, move to the land of Israel. Isaac, God tells Isaac, stay in this land. Even when there's a famine, he wasn't allowed to leave. Stay in this land and I will be with you. But it's almost like connected. If you're here, if you're in this land, I will be with you. So Isaac represents the idea. So both Abraham and Isaac represent the idea. You go to a specific place, there you build your brand, there you build your following, there you build your way of life. And that's where you can flourish. But what's much more complicated is Jacob. Jacob says, you leave your land, you leave the place, not just your native land, but you leave the holy land. You go into a place where the culture is foreign and your values are not common. And there, not only you can survive, but you can flourish. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of the Jewish people in exile. And it's critical to the Jewish people's story because for most of our history, we were not in the situation of Abraham and Isaac, but we were in the situation of Jacob. For most of our history, we were not living on the land of Israel. For most of our history, we were a people in exile, and there would have been no model of living and surviving and even thriving without the story of Jacob. So Jacob's story, therefore, is critical how he not only survives, but also flourishes outside the land of Israel. And that's why the opening scene of the Parsha, he's leaving Israel and he has a vision. And in the vision, there's a ladder. And in the ladder, there are angels going up and down. And then there's the message that God tells him and the promises that God tells him. That image, that scene fascinates all the commentaries. And we can delve into that scene because that's a profound scene because God is telling him something. And a lot of the commentaries, what they have in common, one of the reasons why this is so interesting is because in this scene, you will learn everything you need to know about how to be the Jacob, how to be able to survive in a hostile environment. And of course, that's relevant to us as well, as we'll discuss. But that's why this scene is a very powerful scene, and it's has a lot of meaning and a lot of symbolism. Go ahead, Dr. Tamarin, please.
Well, talking about a hostile environment, what about Laban? He's certainly hostile. He's deceptive. So clearly he's put in the story for a very definite reason. What is the reason, both for us as individuals and for the Jews as a nation? Because Laban is, throughout this whole thing, not very helpful. Yes, Correct. He did provide an older daughter who became pregnant, but basically he's a trickster. He's a bit of a crook.
Yeah, so Laban is not helpful. Why is he in the story? So this gets us to our point. This gets us to point number two. Point number two is that if you look, ironically, if you look at the success rate of Abraham and Jake and Isaac, and then you look at the success rate of Jacob, you would assume that who would be more successful? The one who lived in the land of Israel in a holy environment with relatively few difficulties and distractions. What we find is that specifically Jacob is the more successful one of all three, despite being being in a challenging environment. And when I say despite, what I really mean to say is, on the surface, it's despite, but really it's because of, right? What do I mean successful? So there's different ways of measuring success, but let's look at the measure that was important to the patriarchs, which is to perpetuate the legacy of Abraham of monotheism to the next generation. Okay, so Abraham has two sons. He's successful 50%. Isaac is considered part of the Jewish people. Yishmael is not. He has other qualities. He believes in the oneness of Hashem, but he's not considered the heir of Abraham. Abraham was not fully successful in other words, 50% success rate. 50% is pretty good, but it's only 50%. Now look at the next generation. You have Isaac. Isaac has twin sons, not just two sons from two different mothers, from two different cultures, but actually twin sons. So you would expect that they both would be closer connected or closer, more on the same page spiritually. And yet Isaac too, the success rate is 50%. Jacob is considered part of the Jewish people, and Esav moves away. He says, I don't want to be part of Israel, because if I live in Israel, I'm going to subject myself and my descendants to the Jewish story, which the Jewish story entails being exiled in the land of Egypt for 400 years and then returning. I'm not interested. So he moves to Edom, which is south of Israel, southeast of Israel. He checks out of the family story. So both Abraham and Isaac have a 50% success rate. What happens to Jacob? Jacob has a 100% success rate. What do I mean 100% success rate? First of all, he has no two sons. He has 12 sons, or 13 if you count Dinah. So he's got 13 children. Now, when I say successful, it doesn't mean they're perfect. They are very far from perfect. In the next week, and we're going to read about, really next week, 2 weeks from now, we start reading about the infighting between the brothers, which leads to the sale of Joseph, the kidnapping and sale as a slave of Joseph, which is a horrendous story. It's okay not to get along with your brother, but to sell him as a slave is a little bit extreme, if you ask me, right? So the brothers are not perfect. So when I say they were successful, I don't mean they were perfect, but I mean is that, that Jacob was 100% successful in the sense that all of those people, all his sons and daughter, saw themselves as part of the Jewish people. They didn't check out. They didn't go and say, we're not interested in this philosophy or culture. We're moving and we're starting our own way of life. So in that sense, he was 100% successful, with the odds much more against him, because he's got to replicate the success 13 times. So what do you see here? We see here something fascinating, that sometimes we're not looking for a challenge. We're not looking for a hostile environment, but sometimes the hostile environment actually forces a person to dig deeper and work harder. And what's going to emerge at the end is going to be a greater sense of success. So why was Laban placed in the story? Or I ask myself in my life, and you ask yourself in your life, why does God place this challenge in my life? So what the story is signaling to you is challenge, yes, but success doesn't always come from a place of serenity. Success comes from a place of struggle and growing from the challenge, because the challenge is basically leverage that allows you to dig deeper and in other words, it makes you stronger, because you all of a sudden have to flex the spiritual muscles, which you had no idea you have the potential for. And that's the story of Jacob's life. It's the story of our life, but it's also the story of the Jewish people collectively. Because like I said, for most of our history, we were not in the land of Israel. We were in foreign countries. We were in many instances under some form of persecution or another. And then what happens? What happens is we prosper, we grow, and we survive for an amount of time that people who lived peaceful in their land did not survive, right? Because so in a way, that's the big picture of the story. So in other words, if Abraham comes up with a new idea, and Jacob comes up with and Isaac represents the idea to be committed to the teachings of the past, Jacob has the certain idea of being flexible and being able to adapt to the times and adapt to the circumstances. I don't mean adapt as in change your values, but adapt in the sense that you be able to survive in hostile environments. And the Jewish people have had to have that and had to cultivate that collectively and personally, and that's why we're sitting here we're sitting here today as Jews, as descendants and spiritual descendants of the patriarchs. So that's a little bit about the introduction. Now that we have an introduction, we could start getting a little bit into the body of what exactly is happening here. What is the image? What is the scene? What is the strange story of trying to marry one wife and you get the other wife? And then, of course, a lot more to talk about. So let's. I guess we can begin now that we took care of a few introductory points. We can begin. Okay, so let's open. I'm going to share the screen. We'll open up the verses. We'll read a few verses, and we will see. We'll see what happens. Okay, so the portion opens here on verse 11. That's where the that's where the parsha begins. So it's Genesis chapter 28, verse 11, verse 10. And Jacob left Be'er Sheba, and he went to Haran. And he arrived at the place and lodged there because the sun has set. And he took some of the stones of the place and placed them at his head, and he lay down in that place. And he dreamt, and behold, a ladder set up on the ground, and its top reached to heaven. And behold, angels of God were ascending and descending upon it. So this is the image. This is the dream. What is the dream? He's dreaming that there's a ladder that begins on earth and goes up to heaven, and angels are going up and down. Okay. After that, and behold, the Lord was standing over him, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, the God of Isaac. The land upon which you are lying, to you I will give it, and to your seed. And your seed shall be as the dust of the earth. And here we have a verse that the Rebbe took sort of as the slogan of Chabad beginning in the 1950s, which is to burst forth and travel to all corners of the earth, and you shall gain strength westward, eastward, northward, and southward. That became a Hasidic song, Uparatz da Yama, Vakedma, Tzafona, Venegba, spread everywhere. And through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth, and through your seed. In other words, the Jewish story is not just for the Jewish people. We're spreading everywhere, and the rest of humanity is blessed through the Jewish people. In other words, the values that the Jewish people are bringing to humanity is not just for themselves, but it's for everybody. And then he says, God, and behold, I am with you, and I will guard you wherever you go, and I will restore you to this land, for I will not forsake you until I have done what I have spoken concerning you. Okay, so that's the dream. Beautiful blessings. What could be better? So there's a lot more to say, but I just want to read two more verses about Jacob's response, the beginning of Jacob's response. We'll read 16, 17, maybe later we'll do 18. What does 16 and 17 say? 16 says, and Jacob awakened from his sleep, and he said, indeed, the Lord is in this place, and I did not know. What does it mean? What does it mean I did not know? So Rashi explains, had I known, I wouldn't have gone to sleep there. And he was frightened, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gates of heaven. That's what he says. That's his response. Rashi said earlier that, let me open up some Rashis here so we get the fun. Rashi said earlier that the place, it doesn't say which place, right? It says, Vayifka bamakom, and he arrived at the place. Which place? So what does Rashi tell us? Rashi says, Scripture does not mention which place, but it means the place mentioned elsewhere, which is Mount Moriah, concerning which it is said, and he saw the place from afar. In other words, we have a problem. We open up the Bible and it says, and he reached a place. Which place? It doesn't say which place. So what do? You look elsewhere in the Bible. Where else does the Torah refer to a place as the place? And the good news is we already had a place like that earlier in the story with the binding of Isaac, where God tells Abraham, take your son and take him to place that I will show you. And then it says Abraham comes to the land, the Mount of Moriah, and then he sees the place. Okay, so the place, that's the connection. It's the only other place in the Bible that's referred to as the place. So when Jacob reaches the place, it's referring to the place of temple that would later become a Temple Mountain. So he comes to the Temple Mountain, but he has no idea that it's holy because he's traveling at night. There's no good signage. It doesn't say here is Jerusalem. There was nothing remarkable about the place at the time. So he goes to sleep. When he goes to sleep, what does he see? A ladder and heaven and God and promises. It's amazing. So he wakes up and he says, I'm shocked. That's it. He's surprised. His response is one of surprise, and he says that I had no idea that this divine that I had no idea that this is a holy place, right? So the verse says in and Jacob awakened from his sleep, and he said, indeed, the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. Says Rashi, what does it mean? I did not know it, or I did not know. For had I known, I would not have slept in such a holy place. From Bereshit Rabbah. He feels bad. You go to sleep, and you wake up, and you go to sleep, and you have a dream, and the dream implies that this is a holy place. There's a ladder connecting heaven and earth. It's a holy place. It happens to be. He realizes it's Mount Moriah. He says, "Had I known it, I'm so shocked. There's God, there's divinity in this place. I had no idea. Had I known, I wouldn't have slept here." And then, in fact, in the morning, that's what he does. He takes the stone and he names the place, and he says, "This is Beit Elokim. This is Beit El. This is the." He says, verse 17, and he was frightened, and he said, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is a gate of heaven." Okay, so what's happening here? What does this mean? So just to continue the theme from last time. What's the big idea? This dream and his response to the dream is basically just foretelling what's happening in his next 20 years in the entire parsha. Put yourself in Jacob's shoes. Israel is the Holy Land. God told his father, don't leave the land. Stay in this land and I will be with you. Implying that if you want to be with God, you have to be in Israel. And he now is going outside of Israel. So what's the implication based on the family history? That God is with you in Israel. What does the dream come to say? God says, I'm going to be with you wherever you are, even in the unlikely place, which is exile, which is outside of Israel, which is challenging environment where you don't sense the presence of Hashem. So he wakes up and he says, you know what? I'm surprised. I had no idea that this is a holy place. I had no idea that God is here as well. So technically he meant I had no idea that this mountain is a holy mountain. But what it's really saying is I had no idea that God will be with me wherever I will be. And that ties into the broader theme. The broader theme of Jacob is, could you be holy? Could you be connected in a spiritually hostile environment or in a physically hostile environment? And that's the story. Now that brings us back to the ladder. What is the ladder? The ladder, the angels are going up and the angels are going down. What is the ladder? What does it represent? So it's some sort of connection between heaven and earth. But before we even get to what the connection is, what does the ladder represent? The ladder represents is that the ladder is extended. Wherever you are, you can create that ladder and you can create that relationship with God. So even if you're in a place that's spiritually unlikely to have it to be holy, but the symbolism is telling you you're leaving Israel, but you have a ladder, and wherever you are, you can connect to heaven and the earth. That's what Hashem shows him. And that's what he wakes up and he says, wow, God is here. How is God here? God is here because there's a ladder. Now the question is, what is the ladder? So we'll get to that in a second. But before we even get to what is the ladder, the image is the ladder. The ladder is the point. The point is, wherever you are, you make a connection. You connect heaven and earth. So what's the ladder? So if you look at the various commentaries, going back to the Medrash, going back 2,000 years, there are different interpretations. One interpretation is the ladder represents prayer, because that's the context. Jacob was there. Jacob prayed. According to the Medrash, Jacob prayed before he went to sleep. I could show you that in the Rashi. But also, it's the Temple Mountain. Temple Mountain is a place for contemplation, for spirituality, for offerings, which is the idea of prayer. So the ladder is the ladder of prayer. Another Medrash says the ladder is the ladder of Torah. He says the ladder is like Sinai, it's like Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai sort of connects you to heaven. So you study Torah wherever you are, prayers, Torah study. That is what connects the person to Hashem. And wherever you go, you're sort of extending the ladder to heaven when you pray, when you study. Okay, that's beautiful. Who am I to argue with that? But I did come across a beautiful Kabbalistic interpretation. This is from the students of the Arizal, 16th century. And I think it's very profound. And what it says is, who's the ladder? Who's the ladder? So ladder is either, so far we said it's either prayer is the ladder or Torah study is the ladder. Okay? But the ladder, according to this Kabbalist, his name was Rabbi Mordechai HaKohen of Tzfat. He says, you know who's the ladder? Jacob is the ladder. In other words, the person is a ladder. Why? What is a person? A person is a hybrid of heaven and earth. We talked about this in the beginning of the Torah when the human being was created. Body is from the earth, dust of the earth. But God places the soul into the body, and the person is really a hybrid of heaven and earth. So what's the ladder that connects heaven and earth? The person is the ladder that connects heaven and earth. And then what does it mean that wherever you go, you're extending the ladder? Of course, if you want to feel the connection, you have to pray. If you want to feel the connection, you have to study. But there's something even more profound. Just by the person being in a specific place, you have the ability to connect heaven and earth by virtue of who you are, because you are really essentially a hybrid of heaven and earth. So that's the ladder, and that's the ladder scene, and that's what the message Jacob is getting. And he wakes up, and the first thing is not relief. The first response is surprise, right? He's surprised. He says, wow, God is here. I had no idea. And like I said, it means I had no idea that this place is holy. But maybe what he's really saying is, I had no idea that God is going to come and tell me I'm going to be with you wherever you go. Oh, wherever I go can be holy. Wherever I go, I can be connected to God. I had no idea. That's the surprise. For us, we take it for granted because we're already the descendants of Jacob. But before Jacob, we didn't have this notion. Abraham has to migrate from Haran to Israel to receive the promise and the connection to God. Isaac is not allowed to leave. And God says, be with me. And here we say, yeah, of course you're coming back to Israel, but wherever you go, you can extend the ladder. Wherever you go, you can maintain that connection. Okay, there's a sort of, I don't know if this is a joke or a funny story. I have no idea, but I say it every year. I'll say it now. You have this image of the ladder, and on this ladder you see, the verse says, he sees the ladder. Go ahead, Vicky. Go ahead.
Well, I actually had a question about what you just said, about Jacob being able to connect in heaven and earth. Is that his secret? How he can survive in the hostile environment? Or part of his secret?
Yeah, you have to have a secret. You have to be connected. You have to be connected upward. There's a Hasidic story. It's not a Chabad story, but it's a Hasidic story. The Hasidic story is that there was one of the Hasidic rabbis, and the Hasidim would every morning, one of the things they would do, every morning before you pray, you go to the mikvah. The problem is they didn't have heated mikvahs everywhere, and they lived in Eastern Europe, so it was freezing. So all the stories in the Hasidic history is that they would walk to the river, they would break the ice, and they would dip in the river as a preparation for prayer. That's all. Every story is breaking the right. They broke the ice to go to the mikvah. That's the story. So this story of a specific Rebbe, and he's walking to the river. The problem is that it's ice, and everybody is basically doing some primitive version of ice skating. All the kids or people would come and they would run on the ice and they would slip because you couldn't walk, so you're slipping. So they made an activity out of it. And the story is that this Rebbe, he walks and he doesn't slip. He walks to the river, does his thing, he goes to the mikvah, comes out, and he walks, and this happens day after day after day. So the people sense this must be a holy guy. So they come to him and they say, what's your secret? How is it that we're walking and we're all slipping and you don't slip? So he said an answer in Yiddish, and that became like a Hasidic saying. The Hasidic saying is, it's almost like a pun. He says, when you're connected above, you don't slip below. if you're attached to above, you're not going to slip, But it means, but what it came to mean is that yes, if you're spiritually connected to something greater than self, greater than what's happening in your current environment, in the physical environment, then the physical challenges are not going to pull you down. But this is all you got, if this is all what's meaningful to you, so any challenge that you have now is going to bring you down because you don't have a way of seeing the bigger picture, of placing yourself higher, elevating yourself above the challenge by understanding that there's a deeper purpose. We could talk about that too, because that too is what Yaakov is going to do in a moment with the stones. We could talk about that too. But the point is, yes, you have to live on a higher plane to be able to survive the challenges of the lower plane. Because if you're just in the lower plane, you're in the mud, you're in the circumstance, in the difficulty, you're not going to be able to survive unless you could elevate yourself and see a deeper perspective or a broader perspective. And connecting to heaven, connecting to spiritual values, all of a sudden there's a deeper story, because there's a challenge, but the challenge has a purpose. What's the purpose? Oh, you have to elevate yourself to be able to see that. You have to live on sort of in a higher perspective.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dr. John. Dr. Chapman, go ahead.
In line with what you've just said, Rabbi, I run a pro bono support group of people with cancer. And the ones who do best, I find, are the ones who have this connection you've just described, who feel the imminence of God in their lives.
Right. That's profound. That's profound. There's a Hasidic, I'm jumping around a little bit here, but there's a Hasidic commentary on the word Haran. The word Haran, which is the place where Jacob was running to. And remember, all the Kabbalists, even pre-Hasidic, the Kabbalists explain that this just image, Jacob leaving Be'er Sheva and going to Haran, is the journey, and every soul goes through that journey. Because every soul starts out in heaven. Heaven is a spiritually comfortable environment for the soul, and every soul descends into this earth, and this earth is a spiritually hostile environment for the soul. So why is the soul going through this challenge? And this soul is always being in this earth, being challenged constantly, because its values is not necessarily the values of the culture, but even of the body. The body has biological needs and has self-oriented perspective. And the soul is in a way imprisoned in the body, and then a lot of life is the soul seeking to find self-expression for itself through moments and acts of transcendence, which we'll call mitzvahs. But the point here is every single soul is moving from Be'er Sheva and coming down to Haran. So what is Haran? What does the word Haran mean? What does Haran tell us about the hostile environment and about the soul's journey? So the Medrash says that the word Haran comes from the word, we say it in the Shema, in the second paragraph, Bechara af Hashem bachem. The wrath of God will flare up against you. So Haran is like the blazing wrath. So the Medrash says Haran is a place, it's a negative place, where the place where the wrath of God is there, because the people there are less than moral. There's a Hasidic interpretation. There's a Kabbalistic interpretation. The Kabbalistic interpretation is that Haran comes from the word, it's related to the blazing fire. But fire in biblical Hebrew is related to the concept of dryness, right? Because fire dries up, water irrigates, and fire dries it up. So there is a verse in multiple times in the book of Psalms where King David says, "I have so much difficulties and so much sorrow. Nichar groni, my throat is dry, and basically I can't speak. I can't even pray. Someone's so weak he can't even pray. I'm so sick. I'm so troubled I can't even pray." So King David says, "Nichar groni." Nichar groni means my throat is dry. Haran is the dryness. Says the Kabbalah. What is Haran? Nichar groni. Your throat is dry. What am I saying? What does this mean? What's the inner significance? So now there's a play also. There's a play on this. Haran, says the Kabbalah. Switch the letters of Haran you have to do a little bit of a poetic license, because in biblical Hebrew, certain letters could be transferred for the other ones. So chet and hey are very, very similar, even the way they look. They sound similar, they look similar, right? Chet has it's basically 3 lines, and just the hey has that little opening on the left side. So chet and hey are very, very similar. So if you have charan, which is dry throat, you change the charan, change the chet and the hey, and change the letters, and change the order of the letters, and you got rina. What does rina mean? Rina means a joyous song. Okay, so the Kabbalah says you come into charan, your job is to make charan, take the dryness of the throat and switch it, and make rina, make a song. What do I mean? So let's go one more verse. We'll add one more piece of the puzzle, and then things straighten out. What happens in the morning? He wakes up in the morning, and Jacob arose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had placed at his head, and he set it up as a monument, and he poured oil on top of it. Very beautiful. The only problem with this verse is that Rashi talks about this, the Medrash talks about this, everyone talks about this. The only problem is that why does the verse say he took the stone? He took the stone. Earlier in the story, what do we read in verse 11? And he arrived at that place and lodged there because the sun had set, and he took some of the stones and placed them at his head, and he lay down in that place. Stones. He put stones around his head. So when he goes to sleep, there are stones. When he wakes up, there's a stone. So the many become one. The many become one. What does that represent? Rashi talks about this. Everyone talks about this. But we're going to still stay on our Hasidic story. So the Hasidic story is as follows. Basically, I wasn't going to talk about this, but now that we said that you have to raise yourself up and see the greater story, Haran is a place that dries up your throat and says there's no story. No story means that every individual challenge is all that there is. I wake up in the morning and my head is hurting. That's all I have today, right? What is a story? A story is finding many events, maybe over 20 years or more, maybe multi-generational, maybe over centuries. But a story is you take multiple events and you see that there's a plot. You see that these events are interconnected, that one leads to the next. And from all these seemingly unrelated events, a greater story emerges. That's what storytelling is. So the Kabbalah says, if you want to survive the challenges of this earth, you have to be a storyteller. You have to see that there's a bigger picture that emerges from the specific details. Because then you look at a challenge and you look at a challenge and you say, this is here to pull me down. But then you overcome the challenge, and then tomorrow you have another challenge. So you have to be able to look back and see, hey, I was able to overcome yesterday's challenge. Maybe I can overcome today's challenge. Maybe there's something I have to learn. Maybe there's something I have to grow. What is the bigger picture? What is the plot that connects these various events of my life? Spiritual darkness, spiritual exile is when you stop telling the story. You stop looking for a story, you stop telling a story. And then every challenge is a challenge. But then I'm not raising myself up to see something deeper, see meaning, see purpose, right? Storytelling is the art of finding purpose and unifying purpose in many, many details. And the story and the Kabbalah say, okay, that's the symbolism of the stones, and the stones plural to stones singular. You could look at your life, and every stone is separate. Every stone is its own event. But then you could look at the life and see there's one story, there's one plot, there's one meaning. And the meaning is overarching and the meaning is unifying, right? So it's not just every part of my day I'm doing something else, but there's a unifying energy and purpose that makes the many stones into one stone. So this is all spiritual, the spiritual perspective of how Jacob is able to overcome the challenges by being like the ladder, raising oneself upward, and seeing the bigger picture, seeing the meaning and the purpose. And the purpose is unifying, right? Just a simple example. You want to raise a child, or at least a little child. You have all kinds of things you have to do. You have to pick up the toys. You have to feed them. You have to wake up in the middle of the night. I had a brother-in-law who said, what did he say? He said, parenting is 90% picking up toys and 10% empty threats. That was the formula. But in any case, the point is, there's all kinds of technical things you have to do. And at some point you get burnt out. Why do you get burnt out? Because you're getting burnt out because the details are too boring. The only way to survive, in other words, to keep the energy, is if you see the details as part of a bigger story. You see the purpose. And if you see the purpose, then every detail is part of the greater story. And that's where the energy never comes. And the enthusiasm never comes from the detail. The enthusiasm always will come, no matter what you're doing. I'm just bringing raising children as an example, but it's any example, anything you're trying to do. The details is not where the energy lies. The energy lies in the big picture, in the big idea. The skill of life is to be able to see the big idea in the specific moment. Because what drains us of energy, you say, this doesn't matter. This is not significant. Why am I doing this? It doesn't matter. It's stupid. It's foolish. It's not significant. So I'll make the salad. I'll skip the pepper. I already put in 2 other peppers. In other words, by you tell yourself this detail doesn't matter. And what gives you the energy is no, this detail is part of a greater story. So that's what Jacob does. That's the ladder. That's raising yourself up. That's being able to see the greater vision. That is taking the many stones and making one stone. And you'll see later he pours oil on a stone. Same thing. You're pouring the oil, the enlightenment, the perspective on the physical, technical stone, which is a practical action. Okay, so that's a little bit about the beginning and the opening scene. There's a lot more to say, but we have to move on. I want to at least touch upon the story of the marriage and why Jacob is attracted to Rachel and why he ends up marrying Leah, and he has 2 wives, and we have 4, and later we have 4, and what is the spiritual significance of this, and therefore what it means to us. So we're going to turn the page. We're going to read a little bit of the story, and in the 5 minutes that we have left, hopefully we can give a little bit of commentary. Here we go. So Jacob comes to town. The first thing you go when you come to town is you go to Starbucks. No, there was no Starbucks then. So the first place you go when you come to town is you go to the well. Everybody's coming to the well. There's no running water. You have to go to the well. I think in Haran today, there's no running water. So if you can go there, I have a friend, a colleague, a Chabad rabbi in Turkey. He one summer spent traveling and he sent back pictures from is the town of Haran. The well is still there. I don't know if it's the same well or a different well, but they certainly do not have running water. Okay, so there's no running water, you go to the well. So he goes to the well, and the shepherds are sitting there, not important for our scene. Here is Rachel, 9. While he was talking with them, so he's talking to the other shepherds, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass, Vayehi is like drama. Here's the drama. Vayehi, it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, and Jacob drew near and rolled the rock off the mouth of the well, and he watered the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother. Oh, you missed it. You missed the drama. Basically, the shepherds say we have to wait for all the shepherds to come together so we can move the rock covering the well. But Jacob is so moved by seeing his cousin, who he never saw before, but this beautiful girl, Rachel, and he's so in love and so inspired that he does what the other shepherds can't do by themselves. He moves the rock by himself. Verse 11, and Jacob kissed Rachel, and he raised his voice and he wept. And then he tells the poor girl, she has no idea who the stranger is. And she says, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and told his father. Okay. So they negotiate. So we're going to skip a verse or 2 just because the constraints of time. Verse 16, now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder one was Leah, and the name of the younger one was Rachel. Leah's eyes were tender. Tender is not clear what that means. Rashi says tender means soft from crying. So she's crying. That's what Rashi says. But Rachel had beautiful features and beautiful complexion. And Jacob loved Rachel. And he said, I will work for you for 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And you know the end of the story. Okay. What is the significance? What's happening here? What's the Kabbalistic perspective? There's all kinds of ways of reading this. I've said some of them in the past. Some of them are actually, I said some of the perspectives in the past. So maybe we'll just do 1 or 2 here. Rachel was beautiful. Leah is a very interesting word, because Leah comes from the word, Leah literally means tired. Now, it's a very strange name to name your child. You go to the therapy and you say, what did your parents name you? Leah. What does Leah mean? Leah means tired, right? So what's that going to do for you? That's not going to, you may have to add a couple of years of therapy just for that. What is What is happening here? So Kabbalistically, it's like this. When you say Rachel is beautiful in the Torah, she's of course beautiful, but it's also inner beauty. What does inner beauty mean? Inner beauty means tranquility. In other words, Leah is tired because Leah's life is much more challenging, not just physically, but also spiritually. She's much more like Esav. I don't know if we had time to discuss this last week. Jacob is more, some people are less challenged than others. Some people are less drawn to tension and negativity than others. And this is not a question of whether or not you're going to be it's not a moral question. In other words, there's two ways to make moral choice and be connected to God and be righteous. One is someone who does the right thing, but they're not tempted to do evil. The other person is someone who has to struggle with themselves to make the right choice. Who's more spiritual? Who's more holy? There's no one could say. In a way, this more spiritual one is the one who is challenged. That's what Maimonides says. Maimonides says the person who's challenged, who's drawn to negativity and overcomes their inclination at a much greater level. But the point is, that's tiring. That's not something you would be attracted to. So Rachel is serenity. Life is good. She's beautiful on the outside. She's beautiful on the inside. Leah, his life is challenged. And Jacob loves Rachel naturally. Who will not fall in love with Rachel? Everybody would fall in love with Rachel. But the reality is, if you look at this story and you look at certainly their children, it's the same way. In a way, we don't have time to go through the whole story, but we could talk about this later. Rachel's children are also live in relative serenity. They don't have inner challenge. Leah's children experience inner challenge. They're not perfect. They do terrible things, but they overcome. They repent. They correct themselves. Now, I ask you, what do you love? Do you love serenity or do you love challenge? We all love serenity. We all love beauty. What does God love? What does the Jewish people need? Which one of those two were the ones who rebuilt were the primary mother who built the primary nation, tribes of the Jewish people? Leah had many more children. Leah had Judah. We are Jews, where most of us are descendants of Judah. Which one was buried with Jacob? Not Rachel, who he loved, but Leah, who was challenged. So maybe the takeaway of the story is from the beginning, which is how Jacob has to go to a hostile environment, but also the story of the marriage. And the Kabbalah gets very interesting. You marry somebody else, you fall in love with their Rachel, but you grow from their Leah, right? You don't always see, when you're in love, you don't see the challenging part of the other person because love is blinding. So some people are blind their whole life. Mazel tov is wonderful. But for most people, at some point, you're going to wake up in the morning and you're going to say, I thought I married Rachel, now I married Leah. In other words, I love the beautiful aspects of this person, the serene aspects of that person. I did not fall in love with the Leah aspects of this person. I have my own challenges. Why am I marrying somebody else and have to deal with their challenges too? Right? But what the Torah is telling you, the growth doesn't come from serenity. The growth comes from the challenge. In other words, God doesn't love perfection. Jacob loves perfection. Jacob is attracted to perfection, but God does not love perfection. God loves challenge and growth from the challenge. So maybe that's the story of the entire parsha, both the beginning and the middle, with the marriage and the descendants. And there's a lot more to say, but at least a little bit to wet our tongues. And thank God it's only Tuesday. We have till Shabbat. We can continue learning and continue studying and continue growing. Thank you everybody for joining. I'm sorry that my mouth is a little dry because I didn't fill up my coffee. So I apologize for that. Comments, questions are welcome. We consider all day, all the way till Shabbat, when we'll have to actually turn off the Zoom. Okay, wonderful day, everybody. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Beautiful. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.